Hey, my name is Martin Hauck, and you're listening to From a People Perspective. It's a podcast for HR, recruitment, and operations professionals. If you're looking for a little bit more, you can check out the community at thepeopleplegroup.com. If you're a business owner, or if you're an HR person or a recruiter and you need a little bit of extra support, we've also got a fractional consultancy called Purple Umbrella. You can check us out at purpleumbrella.co.
You
Lisa
are the Game of
Stam.
Thrones chair. Look at that. You are
Yeah.
ready to go.
Yeah, I'm like, what am I gonna do with you know what? It's funny that you bring that up. This Game of Thrones chair. I don't know that I do anything worthy of the Lannister crest. Like I'm not
Well,
a
let's hope you don't do many of the Lannister things.
yeah yeah. This is
Throwing children off of castles and
yeah.
weird stuff with your family. So yeah, no, that's probably good.
This is very much like this is the chair for restructures and reorgs. I think like
Yes.
if
Yeah.
if the closest thing you can get to in HR and people operations that seems to be Lannister like would probably be that. And
That's
like
true. That's true.
Machiavellian leadership, which none of us really want in our day to day at all.
Yeah.
Lisa, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure, Martin. I'm really looking forward to this.
So today, we're going to be chatting with you. You're the founder of Spring Law, and for those, I'll let you do the proper intro. But the one key point that's just near and dear to my heart is Spring Law has been an OG supporter of the People Group since like year 2 or 3 or something like that. And the very first company that we partnered with, you've always sort of believed in what we did. So to you, Marnie, and everybody else at the firm, thank you for supporting the People Group.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
We've been very honored to be connected with what has become such an amazing community.
No, thank you. Yeah, we've got the Ask Legal channel, which your folks are constantly helping out folks and just chiming in with ideas and whatnot. But for those, for the unanointed, for the folks that don't know, yeah, tell us a bit about Spring Law, what they do.
Okay. We are an employment law firm. I started the firm in 2017 with an assistant and myself with the view of being an entirely forever virtual law firm and a legit real one, not just siloed in association remote workers, but an actual proper law firm without bricks and mortar. And really from a digital first perspective and really thinking through client services. So I'd spent some years on Bay Street in my own firm prior to this, and in some small union side firms beforehand. So I had this range of experience before I started Spring Law. But I've been a bit of a digital nerd for a while, so that has helped with some of the vision that we've had around building this totally virtual law firm. And then we started to grow. And so we've had different lawyers join over the years. We have 14 people now, a contractor, and then employee lawyers. And we have 2 people working with us remotely from the Philippines. We have who work in our time zone. And then, an amazing operations team that just pulls it all together.
Interesting. No. So you went remote first before being remote first was not only cool, but necessary. So you're like a remote first hipster, essentially.
When in like 2007, 8, 9, 10, I would catch these articles that I would photocopy about the VLO, the virtual law firm, and I would print them up. So there was a moment in time where it was called VLOs, and it really caught my attention. And just what does that look like, and why? And as I was working through my legal career and seeing the huge amount of money that goes towards lobby renovations or towards flying a whole bunch of people in that don't have any impact on my local market, my Canadian market, for example. And I think when you're in a global law firm, that especially happens. The global footprint is amazing for many companies, but not a lot, right? And so for any local employer, they don't need that big global access all the time. So I was seeing these expenses that are tied to bricks and mortar
Hmm.
that don't actually service the client.
Yeah.
Um, Even just the idea of having a client come in to the office, and if you're downtown Toronto, they have to fight traffic. They have to pay $30 for parking. They may have a big pickup truck or bucket on their car for their family vacations. They can't even get into the parking lots.
Yeah.
Um, and then they do all of that to come in for what, a 45-minute meeting, and then they have to undo all that to drive back to wherever, Bowmanville or wherever they came in from. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. And so we just really thought through, how do I reverse engineer the experience for clients where they get to access services in a way that makes sense for them, instead of the other way around of lawyers having the comfort of a bricks and mortar office.
That's and so you this was just something that you picked up in an article, and you're like, one day I'm gonna have a law firm.
I started
And
looking for VLOs, and then, I saw an article at one point, and then at some point the internet got invented in there as well. I mean, that's how long this has been around. And then I just, and then technology keeps catching up and really giving us this equal playing field to do all of this. So yeah, the VLO turned into, a virtual law firm, and now whatever we call it now, remote workers, telecommuting. Although I don't think anyone calls it that anymore. But
yeah,
um
you've
yeah, and
seen
then
you've
COVID
seen
hit.
all the iterations, right? Like those are all things that
Yeah.
ways we've called basically the same thing.
Mhm.
And no, that's cool. And so so started that from day one. Were you at a VLO, I guess, before you started Spring Law?
No, I left Bay Street in my 10th year of practice in 2014, and I started up a firm with a friend of mine where we did have an office. And we would meet people in person, and we were together for 3 years. And that's where I was really thinking, you know what, we don't need to do this. Now that I have the agency to make these choices,
Mm,
which you can't do when you're in a bigger firm,
no.
how do I, like, what should it look like? So as I kept getting more and more digital minded, we ended up splitting after 3 years, and that's when I started Spring Law with the goal. Okay, I'm all in. It's going to be all paperless, in the cloud, and virtual. Which those three things didn't happen very much in law firms. 2017 is not that long ago, but
Yeah.
it's pre-COVID, and I think the legal industry in particular was just forced, kicking and screaming, to update a little bit, at least during COVID.
Yeah.
I think there's some kicking and screaming to return to the good old
Hmm.
days of everyone hanging out and having scotch together on Friday afternoons, and not eating with your children, and like all the things that we did pre-COVID. So we'll see where the industry sort of lands, but um, it for those years before COVID, when we were fully digital, we really had to work around the realities of opposing counsel, for example, who never had cameras in their office. And so,
Mm,
like, I like doing video calls whenever I can, because to me that's really almost as good as in
yep.
person for what we do.
Yep.
And now it's weird not to do a video call with people.
I have to do a side tangent here because my brain won't let me. But what do you think about doing like virtual, proper like a VR headset, meeting clients with like a Facebook Meta headset on? Is that a future that you're like? Are you printing out articles or saving articles or bookmarking articles about
Yeah,
VR
bookmarked
headsets?
it. Yeah, I think that's fun. I actually explored this platform that would allow us to have meetings in the metaverse. I really want,
Yeah.
I was stuck for a year, and have our webinars on that. It's called Verbella, for anyone who's interested in exploring it. It's pretty cool. I really loved it. So our marketing manager, Mandeep, she knows how much I was like pushing for us to move from our regular platform to that. The problem is the other side
Yeah.
needs to download so much stuff. And when it's such a great idea, but most of that is not yet in the cloud, so you're eating up a ton of bandwidth on your laptops, and so it just didn't become feasible. We
Yeah.
reverted back to, okay, our webinars are going to be on a link. But in terms of meeting, like with uh Oculus or some sort of virtual, that would be great, but the other person needs the equipment, so I'm
Yeah.
not sure yet where we're at with that.
It's the the blessing and the curse of being like an it's the curse of being an early adopter, like paying attention to cutting edge is you get excited for it. You see the value, you can see all the potential, and then you look behind and everybody's just distracted what they've been doing for the last 10, 15 years, and it takes a while for like that tipping point to hit for people to
Hmm.
realize the value.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
in terms of spring law, just in general, just this is more just like branding. I mean, is there something behind spring, like law? Obviously got to have law in the name, but spring law, what's your take, what's
Ooh,
your
thanks
angle
for asking.
on the
I
naming
have to say, when I set up the firm, probably the hardest thing was picking a name.
Yep.
Like, because it's and I had a bunch of criteria, but the big thing I knew is I didn't want it to be named after me,
Yeah.
because I want the firm to be bigger than me and bigger than the sum of the parts, right? So for sure, I never wanted it to be Lisa Stam Law. That was always for minute one. But I also wanted it to be easy to spell, a
Hmm.
single syllable, so that it's easier for domains and for people to remember, right? And when you're giving out your email, it's not this long complicated thing. So I knew I had some practical considerations that I wanted to figure out. And so then it was, okay, well, what meaning, what word, what concept? So spring law is two things. One is this idea of springing forward in your career. So whether you're springing forward your company or your career, and just the imagery around springing forward. That was,
Mm.
and so our webinars are called Spring Forward webinars, and springing forward. And then the other piece that's just sort of made sense is this idea of renewal, and spring being a season of renewal and a fresh start for when we're on for employee sides, and they're transitioning jobs, or helping them with the termination, for example. um, most executives are upgrading when they get fired. And so I like thinking of it as that way. No one thinks of that in the moment. They're devastated. But then over time, it's like, oh, wait, that was never the right fit anyways. And now I've got this new, better opportunity.
Hmm.
For employers as well, like this idea of refreshing their materials and their contracts, handbooks, processes,
Yeah.
culture. I don't know. And I'm a nature girl, so it was nice to just have be able to like pull in the green and blue of nature, water and grass.
Nice, nice. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I fully agree with you. Choosing the name for a company is literally like Monica and myself. We've got our fractional consultancy together, and the amount, like, it was, we would have meetings every week, and we would just like
Mhm.
throw spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. And
Yeah.
someone actually just recently came up with one of the names that was on our short list, which was Pocket HR. And so one of our TPPG members, Amna, she started her own consultancy called Pocket HR. It's so hard. It's so hard.
Hmm.
It's such
What
a
do you
hard,
mean?
just
Yeah,
choosing.
choosing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just like a really, it's there's all these other things that you think should be hard. I'm like, oh, setting up bank. I mean, banking in itself is difficult enough, but especially Canadian banking. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, and
it's
for law firms,
yeah,
we until maybe 2 years ago, I realize you run it as a sole proprietor first, but then you switch to professional corporation fairly early on. And the law society, you had to get approval of your name from the law society. So they actually
really.
rejected me at first, because there were three licensees in the province of Ontario whose last name was Spring, and that would create market confusion. So I contacted
Mm.
all three people, one of whom I had to dig hard on the internet to find him. He was like 105 years old and practicing for 3,000 years, and he was the one person that said, "Oh no, you can't use this name because it is market confusion." I'm like, "Do you know how hard it was for me to even find you on the internet? There's no confusion here." And
Yeah,
different areas. The other two, one didn't respond, the other one didn't care. But the law society still said no, even after I did all that due diligence. So thankfully, they just changed. They happened to change the rules a couple of years in, and then they just stopped creating this whole bureaucracy of vetting law firm names. It's such a simple example of the law industry
yeah,
being so conservative all the time, and always just slow. Even just the name of my law firm, it
yeah.
it it was a pain in the neck to get that approved by the law society
Let's make a
initially.
process for it. Let's, yeah.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, and so you mentioned it kind of in the explanation, but there's probably more than two sides, but sort of like two main types of clients. You've got employers and employees. How, just as a as a business person, how do you distinguish sort of like priority? And I imagine members of the people group are kind of curious as well in terms of like, how do you split that up, and how does that process work?
So we do service both.
Hmm.
Um, our blogs, our marketing, our external messaging. We're speaking to our ideal client, who we've named Stella, who is an HR professional or business owner, with probably somewhere between 20 to 50 employees. So
Right.
we have all kinds of clients under that and over that for sure.
Hmm.
But that that's sort of our target market that we're always looking for, where they have enough of a group of people that have some HR issues, but not like a whole team of HR professionals, because that way we can help and really, get in there and help with the day to day. And then employees come through. So we executives, employees, we're always helping that out as well, help them out as well. Um, I don't know. We're big enough. It's a huge market of people in the workforce that we haven't had any issues with conflicts at all.
Yeah.
But we're always really careful about that up front
Yeah.
and making
Yeah.
sure that that all gets done before we even talk to anybody. Um, and it partly depends on like for the lawyers who would work with the client. We have some on the team who really love the employee side and prefer that, and some who prefer the employer side. um, some who like more the sort of corporate transaction spreadsheety type of work when it's larger, reductions in force, for example. So it's the lawyer that you would get when you show up. It really, there'll be some different skill sets that people can
Yeah.
bring to the table to help.
You've, by nature of the role, right? If I'm a recruiter, I get to meet and talk to a ton of candidates from across all different, walks of life, and I get to hear their stories and their problems, and I get a good sense of what makes them great candidates. I get a sense of what makes them interesting candidates, strange candidates. All you get the mixture. I think from your lens, given the it's employment law, so you're helping HR people or employees. Um, what for the listeners, like especially sort of in that, like the Stella range of your ideal, sort of, what kind of stands out to you in terms of like HR folks who just really get it and are on the ball,
Mm.
and like what are some of the traits that, because a lot of times people will jump into a new role or get promoted into HR from office management. We see that a lot from the people group. It's kind of why we exist. And so from your lens, from sort of like an outsider's lens, what are the traits and qualities that you see in like really high quality HR people that stand out to you?
I love that question. Um, I love it when the HR person is organized, first of all, and just gives me all their shit up front, and not, I hope I can swear, and not like at the very end where they surprise me with like, oh, by the way, there was a harassment complaint I forgot to tell you about, or oh, by the way, they just came back from a mat leave. I do like it when we just get all the facts up front, give me all the documents that we need to see, and let us do our job. It's way more efficient for me to read stuff quickly than it is for you to retell a story verbally, right? So I
Mm,
certainly always want to hop on the phone and meet people and have that video call so we can connect and have that human touch point for sure, and really get a sense of style and preference and all that kind of thing. But then let me read stuff, because that'll be faster and so way more cost effective.
mm,
I love when an HR person is good with spreadsheets and gives me information or charts, either one, but like gives us information in a clear and concise way. Um, what I find a challenge is when I don't care if an HR person has 30 years of experience or 2 months of experience. It's actually really fun working with new people
mm,
and sharing information with them. But what is a challenge is when an HR wants to be the employment lawyer on the file. And I'm sure it's equally annoying for every HR person when every employment lawyer they meet thinks that they can do HR. Those are such different worlds. There is a great overlap in between for sure, but it's nice when we work together in our own lanes,
yeah.
and talk about what those are. Right? Like I shouldn't be doing there's just a, I don't know, I can think of a whole bunch of things that employment lawyers really shouldn't dabble with. That's HR professional world, of
Hmm.
really digging into, performance reviews and what are all the details and criteria and benchmarks to use in that. I can tell you if it's discriminatory, or if if it's not meeting the threshold of just cause, for example. Um, but there's lanes to deal with, right? And
Yeah.
so when we get an HR person who says, okay, I've done all the analysis and applied Wakesdale and Dufault and all the cases, and I think that here's this and here's that, and this is what it should be. It becomes really hard to move them off that if they didn't know about this case or that case.
Mm.
And I don't know, 80% of what we do right now is trying to deal with bad termination clauses that have just been knocked all over the place since 2020. And so what's nice is when people approach us and say, here's the problem. I have done some thinking about it, but you go do your job, I'll do my
Yeah.
job, and then we divide and conquer together, which
Yeah.
is more efficient and cost effective for clients.
Is it a matter of sort of, I'll take them a medical example, but sort of like the person that has symptoms, they've gone on Google, they've self-diagnosed, and then they go to their doctor and say, "Hey, this is what I think I need. Just can you just write the prescription?" That sort of approach and mentality is the challenge, like because there's a
Oh,
balance of being informed as well, right? So
yeah.
I'd be
Oh,
curious
and
to
I
know the distinction.
Yeah, and I love it when people come informed. So I'm not suggesting not to do that. Like I like it when we can sort of jumpstart to, okay, you're right, ESA does say it's this number of weeks, right? Like and I think even 10 years ago when it wasn't all so available online for free,
Yeah.
I mean, so I've been practicing for 20 years, and my first couple of years, a big job of juniors was to advise on what the ESA amount was, because it wasn't just there for everyone to see, which is really weird to think how long ago that, or how not that long ago that was. But you're right. If you go to the doctor and say, write me this prescription, really, um, you're missing out on the doctor's experience with all other patients where that symptom might actually be
Yeah.
this instead of this, or this shouldn't counteract with this meds that you're already taking. And so that don't take this. So I think that's a really good analogy of coming with the diagnosis in mind already, as
Yeah.
opposed to describing all the symptoms. I mean, I'm sure it's helpful, lawyers, doctors, to hear, I think it might be this.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but when they kind of they've done so much work and invested in the answer, then it's just it's not effective. And yet a big part of our job is to try and help HR people look good in front of all the people to whom they are accountable.
Hmm.
And so I know we also need to help navigate the fact that HR people are looked to from all corners of the organization to have all the answers. And it can be a bit uncomfortable to say, I don't know, and then have to phone in someone. So answers are given because HR is so busy all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. There's no shortage of things to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's a there's a part of that where it sounds more like you need to have an open mind, right? It's okay to come in with, oh, I think it's this. The other thing that I thought was interesting was, give us the debrief versus like tell us the story. Like you need to hear the story, you need to connect with your clients, or you need to connect with HR folks to understand what the problem is. Is it sort of like a natural tendency for people to just almost get emotionally attached to the situation because it's charged in some capacity? Like you're engaging a lawyer, it's probably not because somebody's like mad about like this fantastic bonus they got.
Hmm.
It's because something is messy, something is broken, which ties to emotion. And so because it's is there sort of like this natural inclination, like, no, I need to tell you the story full on, and you're sitting there like respecting their, that process. Like part of it's like almost to a degree probably like therapeutic or like
Hmm.
um but then in reality it really comes down to a few key points. Is that typically the case, or am I misreading that?
Yeah,
Or
no, I mean, when we're representing an employee side, if I'm doing an intake call with an executive, for example, you have to build in what 10 minutes of just hearing the color of the matter, and
Yeah.
hearing their emotion, and people getting it off their chest. That's all human, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure HR has it every day as well, right?
Yeah.
It's venting is a negative word to use, but it is a way of, it's cathartic. It's like finally speaking to someone who will advocate for you and be
Yeah.
on your side. And I think you need that space to first hear that story for sure. Um, but and so the employee side, there is a bit of a different journey there where you're really trying to say, like, just give me the chronology in writing and then let's talk about the color, as
Yeah.
opposed to spending 2 hours giving me the details that you're going back trying to remember. When it's employer side, when we're dealing with HR, I still love to get a chronology in writing. What are the main events happen? Send me, like, if there's a performance review involved, if there, just always send me the contract. If you've already drafted up a termination letter, great. I'm happy to take a look at that and see. I do want to collaborate with people 100% of the time and see how we can make this the most time and cost effective for clients. Um, but I do need to hear the color still.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, because then we'll miss all the nuances, which is, I think, why, as much of a nerd as I am, and really digital forward, I love automating everything behind the scenes. I don't think I'm certainly not worried about lawyers or HR getting replaced anytime soon by AI. We use AI all the time,
Hmm.
but there still is something about having the conversation at some point, hopefully early on before it all hits the fan really badly, and understanding the context. It's
Yeah.
not it's not um it's not a pure transactional corporate law matter. It's a human matter, and which is why I love this area of the law. You have to hear that story
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Do you have any, maybe examples isn't the right path to go down, so feel free to nudge me off of it. But are there any sort of like examples or stories that you can be obscure enough about without, naming folks, but like where it's like, hey, this was going to be really messy, but we looked at the human side of things and then we addressed
Mhm.
the human side of things, and what we anticipated was going to be a real big mess ended up being, a pittance in comparison.
Yes, and I can share themes that
Yeah.
are strategies that I always use for that. Number one is when you're about to fire someone, assume they will be unhappy and assume that nothing you say will make them happy. And so all of this sort of extra stuff that happens to try and make it less messy, often is just adding fuel to a fire, right?
Yeah.
So just being super frank, transparent, like, this sucks, but we have to fire you. Word it nicer than that, but like, cut to the chase, and then communicate really well after that. Because where I find messy things get messier is when the employee is uncertain, or building out a narrative based on too few facts, or misunderstanding, or certainly coming to the table with maybe years of assumptions already about how
Mm.
they've already been mistreated and this is the final straw.
Yeah.
And so that, I don't think that you can over communicate with an employee who's about to be either disciplined or fired, to just really share what the process is, what the timelines are going to be, who is going to talk to them about this, and then what is included in the package. I don't love termination letters that are super detailed about the why of the termination. That's good in a conversation, but a really big chunk of the time it just isn't working out and it's a business decision.
Yeah.
And that's for terminations. For things like coming back from a leave, or ambiguity on a leave, um, paper records, email. I love email. All right. It's just a really informal conversational way to keep a record of the attempts that you've made to learn about what's going on with someone.
Okay, here's a question.
Hmm.
Email and Slack and WhatsApp and text messages and, pigeon carriers, like there's a million ways to get information between the employee and the employer.
Right.
What sort of distinctions or best practices should both parties be making when things are getting a little bit spicy?
I think strategically, as soon as everyone, if you're always on Slack, and then all of a sudden you start sending formal emails that address them, like, dear, everyone's radar is going to go Their spidey sense will logically go up.
Yeah.
It's all written. It doesn't actually matter. There's lots of case law out there about compelling text messages and it being legit evidence no different than something else, right?
Right.
And we can timestamp things with all of this different platforms. Timestamp, see who the author is, like do all the things. So I'm not worried about that. More what it is, certainly if you have any platforms where conversations get, archived or deleted after 30 days or um, video calls, there isn't necessarily a record, for example.
Yeah.
So any written communication, as long as if it's getting a bit spicy, keep a record of it somewhere. That
Yeah.
would be the only thing. And so whether or not it's coming in from different angles, um, I love using a soft phone app for text messaging and for text messaging with a client, for example, because that way it can still all just be pulled in. If that's the most convenient for a client, that's fine. But then it ring fences it into a central place for record keeping. So I would say it's more about record keeping slash maybe evidence down the road, but there isn't any sort of holy grail of written communication anymore at all.
Have you seen an uptake? That's very helpful to know. Thank you. Have you seen an uptake in there's tools out there like Fathom or Fireflies or just transcription of video calls? Are you seeing, managers recording one-on-ones more often? And just by doing that as a practice, they've got communication with individuals sort of documented. And is that too Orwellian or Big Brother like is there concerns
Hmm.
there? Can that stuff be used? Should you use it? What's the best practice?
I know. You know what? AI is kind of tripping that up a little bit, I have to say. I think we collectively agreed it feels uncomfortable to be audio or video recording everything and that
Yeah.
it feels very Big Brother for sure. But AI is now just a handy, convenient tool. But like I use Fireflies as an example, and I'm still trying to figure out when to use it because I don't use it for clients. I don't want to use it for internal calls because it doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
So my legal uh, answer is different than my human answer. Legally, like an employer is entitled to do that if they disclose, right?
Yeah.
But then good luck on getting your employee to really speak openly, or it's going to amp things up. I mean, for all the same advice we've been giving for years about how uncomfortable it is to be recorded all the time when you want to have a conversation about performance or going on a leave or a harassment complaint. I don't know, it feels like it's a good protection for the employer,
Yeah.
but so is having a second person in the room taking notes where
Yeah.
it's transparent that that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Right.
Having a witness is great, but a recording, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, from an HR point of view, isn't that always going to amp everyone up?
Yeah, in from an HR we've got clients and I've worked with companies where it's just full on all meetings are recorded just from an efficiency perspective and
Mhm.
auto summarizing notes. They're not always perfect and they miss nuance to a certain extent. I think the tricky part is because of that, it kind of messes up the point of taking notes if AI is not going to transcribe it and that feels and seems messy. Would the best practice, I guess, and I agree with you. I don't think it, first off, it's not an easy question or easy solve. I lean more towards personally just like opting towards the thing that's comfortable for the individual. Like you want to work at a place that
Mhm.
makes you feel good as opposed to like I go to I have this great job. I enjoy the people I work with. My boss is cool. Company's doing well. But there's this weird practice of we record every meeting regardless. And, there's, you know, people aren't going to be transparent in those circumstances as much as I've got a recruiter friend who starts off the conversation without recording the call, but then says like, "Hey, let's jump in." And so in those moments,
Mm.
they can go through any of this stuff so that they could take notes or the person can feel comfortable. And then they say, like, listen, I'm going to record the next 15 minutes of the conversation because we're going to get into some technical questions that I'm not going to be able to elaborate or summarize in the right way. And I want to be able to share that with the hiring manager. So pressure kind of goes up to a degree in terms of like the intensity of an interview, because now you're being recorded and, don't
Mm-hmm.
screw it up. You don't want to screw it up. But at least you've been given a window of time to speak freely, air quote,
Yeah.
right? So that's my take on it.
Yeah, but and it still always comes back to trust. And so if you're in certain industries like call centers or banks or certain regulated industries, we all just know that it's recorded. Everyone just knows, and it is what it is. Um and it's for quality purposes, but it's really to monitor your employees. We know that. And so setting those examples aside, so for the rest of us not in those industries, um, if we trust why something is being recorded and that it won't be used against us one day, I bet you nobody would care.
Yeah.
But you have to trust in the first place. But then you now have to fully disclose to the other party why you're doing it, where is it sitting, who will have access to it, what happens if the relationship does go down, south in a year. Are you going to pull this out and use it against me? That's a lot of conversation to have, and I think if you have a really easy trusting relationship, you can probably get through that list pretty quickly. But um I don't know. Why do we need to record each other all the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Hilariously, we're doing a podcast, but there's a
Yeah,
purpose
fair
for it,
enough.
right?
Well, note taking, like I think there's legitimate accommodation issues to think about. Not everybody can write quickly if they have any injuries in their hand or any other medical issues that prevent them from typing quickly. Just like colleagues in law where we're taking notes while we're on a call with a client because we know that we need to record that and follow up with it. The Law Society wants us to be, having good records. But it's within a cone of confidentiality. It's protected, it's privileged. And so it can't be used against our client. I mean, it can be used against your own client if they're lying and flip-flopping down the road. You can go back and look at it now and say, well, actually, back in August, this is what you wanted me to do. But you're not going to use it against them to the world. And I think that's what's different with HR or employers, where you might use that information to discipline someone or fire them.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, there was that one instance, I'm sure you saw it, where the employee live streamed or recorded her termination and basically just full on. And then the community and like the HR community was divided. Like there's people that were pro employee doing that and saying you have every right to. And I don't know, did you get into that? Did you have a stance on it, or?
I know I can't remember the name of it, but that wasn't that long ago that happened. Yeah, I mean, I think every HR person should assume that they're being recorded at this point, right?
Yeah.
So the question we're first addressing is, should the employer and HR do it? But the number of I think and I'm seeing HR issues when it has gotten tense and hitting the fan. And so I have a very skewed experience with this as an employment lawyer, but the number of times employees are recording, whether or not the employer knows, and I know that from the executive side, right? I think HR should assume they're always being recorded. It is so easy to do that on your phone. Just ask your teenager, and there's like a billion ways that they know how to record everything, right? And so it totally happens.
So you should assume it. You should.
Oh, I think HR should assume it and govern yourself accordingly. I like, and I'm not being, I'm not exaggerating or being facetious or sarcastic. Like I actually do think it happens way more than we realize.
Is there because you mentioned it a bit before and it wasn't clear to me, but so is the employee protected? Like the employee can record the employer without their consent, but the employer can't record the employee with their consent? Am I like understanding that dynamic correctly?
So this is all covered by the criminal code about wiretapping, basically, right? So you can record. That's what this is, right? So you can record It's not illegal in Canada if one party consents. So what we can't do is spy on other people's conversations if you're not part of it. But if you are in the conversation, one of those people, you're one of the participants, so you're allowed to record it. What you do with it is another story. The employer side, the same criminal code rules apply. So but it's more of the strategy and practical piece of it, right? And so we also now have the Electronic Monitoring Act, where you really, within the Employment Standards Act that came out a couple of years ago. So there is extra layers for employer side, both whether you should and can you. So you certainly, it's old law about whether or not you can put video cameras everywhere. You can on your parking lot and public spaces, but obviously you can't inside your washrooms or change rooms. Like there are restrictions about how much you can record your employees. The worst thing to do is record and not disclose, because you
Yeah.
can't even use it later then, right?
Right.
It becomes, you certainly breach everybody's trust beyond this one employee. Everyone will find out, and everyone becomes suspicious. So that for me, I'm always really not enthusiastic about it because of the human ripple effect
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it has.
That's the
But you know what, Martin? The AI tools remain a really interesting issue, because we're okay with the convenience of note taking and
yeah.
why that might be useful.
Yeah.
But is it to record so that you can, use it against the person down the road? Not really. We just sort of have it automatically integrated into our video chats and wherever else, and it all sort of flows automatically without thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait a second, you can go back, and now you can go back 2 months ago and say, like, actually verbatim I said this because here's the transcript, and so A plus B doesn't equal C in this.
And something like Fireflies includes a video clip as well,
Yeah.
so you can the whole thing is there.
Yeah. It was always a good, like, if you're, almost like a social media approach, right? It sounds similar to what you're suggesting on the HR side. It's like, if you're not comfortable with this tweet or this Instagram post being on a billboard on the 401 or the DVP that everybody can drive by, you should probably not do it.
Yep.
And so
And you
by
know
the
what?
same
It's not a
token,
generational thing, I don't think. It's I've dealt with employees who are, boomers, Gen Xers, who think that it's private, and then Gen Z millennials who think it's private. So it's across the board of people having just their unique perspective of a definition of privacy,
yeah,
and what that all means. But this is where policies come in, and and setting expectations of privacy, and being clear about what can be used in the workplace. But it's really curious how everyone has their own unique set of expectations around this.
what's the one thing employers almost always miss, and it's just a huge gap that they could fix really easily? They're just always failing on it.
Um, I don't know. I don't know that there's one unique thing. I do think communications is such a core piece all the time. When
Yeah,
you've got like a leadership team that's making all kinds of effort to come up with great developments for the workplace, but it's not fully communicated, that can be an issue. And it happens so often inadvertently because people are just busy.
yeah,
Um, and maybe someone else was supposed to communicate, or I don't know, but communicating what's going on, because I would say, like I said earlier, such a big reason why employees are so hurt in a termination, or discipline for that matter, or an investigation, is because they weren't heard, or they were misunderstood, or they're in the dark about what's going on, and so everyone's imagination goes wild at that point.
yeah.
So good communications, I would say, is it sounds so trite, but it just bad communication amps up the temperature so much. And so when you don't just talk to someone that you're unhappy with in a honest and frank way, um everyone can feel it, right? And then the
Yeah.
imagination goes wild, and it just becomes far more expensive when you're negotiating with them in a termination package, for example.
Yeah. I was gifting a friend the Dare to Lead book by Brene Brown, and I was skimming through the book, just kind of like trying to rejig, like, did I read this? Did I read all of it?
Hmm.
Um, and one of the pages that stood out to me was just being clear is kind, right? So being direct
Yeah.
about you're actually being kind, and it kind of dovetails off of um, Kim Scott's Radical Candor, where it's like you're being direct because you care, right? You're saying harsh truths or harsh perspectives because without it, that person's going to flail around or screw up or not, not take it
Hmm.
to the next level. And it's always kind of a weird dynamic in the moment because the leaders that I've worked with that have practiced that really well, um, in the moment it kind of sucks, but once the emotions kind of settle, like, oh, I really
Yeah.
appreciated. And it's hard, right? It's a hard
Yeah.
conversation, right? And that's kind of the big thing with HR is like you can kind of go for a long period of time without really dealing with hard conversations in a good way, and that just creates way more
Hmm.
problems for
Yeah.
everyone, I think. Um,
Totally. I mean, progressive discipline, um, which both of us are deal with all the time in each of our professions. Um, I do get lots of employer clients that are a little surprised that that they didn't do enough progressive discipline, and that's where assumptions and differences of opinions are across the spectrum. It's not good enough just to just hint to someone that they maybe could do a bit better. That's
yeah,
very different than saying, look, here's the benchmarks that you're not hitting. Here's the expectations. You have to improve within X number of weeks, months, years, whatever it is. All that clarity, it's work. It's extra effort for the employer or HR person or manager to do that. It's an upfront investment that always has to happen. But so I would say a theme of what doesn't work for employers is when they're not, again, effectively communicating, but more than they think. Hints are no good. Written records are critical. The number of times that some frontline supervisor did have a conversation but nobody wrote it down, it's now completely useless and can't be used from a progressive discipline point of view.
we've talked a bunch about AI adjacently, but directly, how do you see AI impacting the world of employment law? Like, what are you keeping your eyes on? What's got your attention the most in terms of biggest change, biggest impact?
Okay, this is my favorite topic right now, so thank you. Um, the internet did a great big jump forward in terms of information being available to everyone.
Yeah,
AI is now taking that up 1,000 steps. Just simple chat GPT is as an example of one of all the different platforms people can be using now. The access to information, but then also being able to process it and draft it and write it and do all the things. It's transforming both HR and employment law. Absolutely. So I think it's great because it's giving us the head start on things like policies or frameworks for investigations or I don't know. There's a billion things that it can be a head start for writing, let alone marketing and that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
in our substantive world, um, it's not the answer. It's the initial work product. So in the world of law, a big profit model for the last century has been you've got all these junior lawyers who are churning out all kinds of sort of low end legal work that in my early days, looking up what the and billing to advise people what the ESA entitlements would be. And like all this low level stuff. Now, not only can AI do it, but it's transforming the billing model so that it ought to be more cost effective for clients so that we can all just jump to an actual judgment phone call or conversation and advise on how to implement what's the strategy and just skip all this stuff because we can get to it so much faster now
Hmm.
and then have the lifeline instead. So it makes my job way more fun because I can just jump to straight communications with a client about, okay, now how do we implement all of this?
Let me throw a scenario at you, because we talked a bit about this before, where there was like this dynamic of, people being super informed and being very rigid about their train of thought, and then it's like, actually, well, here's all these things you haven't considered, and it's really hard to get them to consider those things because they
Hmm.
seem to have made their own mind up. How would you feel if, say, an HR person has a situation, they've run the situation through ChatGPT, they've used a few prompts, maybe they've used a few frameworks, and they come to you and say, here's my situation, this is what ChatGPT told me. Are you excited by that individual's efforts and approach, or is it like, oh my goodness, not one of these again?
I'm personally excited about it because then we can talk about prompts and like how did you get to that answer? Because and let's learn from each other because we're all still training
Yeah.
AI right now, and so what would be a different prompt to use, or why I have the advantage, as you do as well. We've had a few years on our profession pre AI.
Hmm.
And so it allows us to kind of have a gut instinct about the answer, what it's probably going to be. But then it's nice to be able to just brainstorm with AI, or, work through what scenarios might be, or, throw in questions about strategy to just, try and solicit a broader range of answer to the question in a really time effective way. And so if an HR person is coming to me and they've already done that, our whole conversation is elevated. And I think it's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
It's we've all discussed it, and or we've all thought through it a bit more. Um as long as people are putting in a prompt and then questioning, like the prompt, there should never be only one prompt for any answer, in my view. You need
Yeah.
to ask a question, and then often what I'll do is, are you sure? Or actually, I think it's the opposite, and like
Yeah.
try and trip up Jonathan, which is the AI bot that I've configured for our firm that we use. I like to trip up Jonathan and ask him like, "Are you sure? And what about this case?" And then AI wants to please, and so it'll say, "Oh, you're absolutely right. My apologies
Yeah.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
blah, blah, blah." And so you test it all the time,
Yeah.
and so this is why I'm not worried about AI replacing us, because we're not there yet of it being perfect. But
Yeah.
boy, is it a great head start in
Yeah.
so many ways
So
for both HR and the lawyer.
it's a welcomed approach, as long as the person's open-minded and isn't just doing a single prompt and just saying, oh, that's my answer, and just taking it at face value.
But we wouldn't do that with like a junior lawyer or a junior, or like an assistant that you'd have, or or a person new to your firm or your organization or the industry. I don't know. I think the problem, people get frustrated with AI and technology when it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But why are we expecting perfection from it? We don't expect perfection from humans, but as soon as AI or any sort of tech tool out there is imperfect, we're like, forget it, we're throwing it out, it's useless. But that makes, I don't know, then test it and iterate, and maybe the input was crap, because garbage in is garbage out.
Yeah.
So the user needs to also take some responsibility if the output isn't good. There's something that went in that didn't work properly.
Yeah. You have to be very judicious about your approach.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, one of the one of the kind of changes, I think, to the space is that there's all these blogs out there, and law firms are in Spring Law's blog, and all the articles that have been written have been super helpful and get shared within the people group on a regular basis, not just from Spring Law folks, but just others. And one of the one of the things that I'm sort of wondering is, do you see that evolving going forward, or changing in terms of
Hmm.
like the approach? Because it is such a valuable resource. It's like, okay, I have a question. I'm not ready to call a lawyer yet, but you do want people to be able to find the answer, so that when they get enough of what they're looking for and it's complex enough, they pick up the phone, and or they send the email and they say, hey, let's have
Hmm.
a chat.
Yeah.
What are you keeping an eye on in terms of how that area of business is going to change?
So I had my first blog in 2009. I started one back then, and I had to get special permission of the firm that I was at the time. And there wasn't a social media policy yet. And there was a lot of questions about, are we giving away intellectual capital?
Hmm.
And should we allow one person to have the ability to do this? And I kept saying, look, you send me out on speaking gigs, you have no idea what I'm saying there. I could be giving all the wrong information. Here's a link to my blog. You can see exactly what I'm writing and question me if I'm not doing it right.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I eventually did it anyways and did it on my own and all that kind of stuff. But we're not giving away intellectual capital. The world is evolving where information is more readily available. I'm still always very careful not to give customized legal advice to strangers without the proper retainer and all the usual regular law society requirements, because I don't want things being taken out of context, um, or for people to misunderstand what I'm saying without the opportunity to talk to them. So but I think there's a giant range of information that can be shared that hopefully is useful, that's probably out there already, especially now, right? I mean, the Ministry of Labor has really done a fantastic job over the last decade, let's say, of just putting all kinds of good materials out online that used to be a subscription service from different private companies. So
Yeah.
like, we definitely have good resources out there. Where I see my job as a lawyer out there doing social media and out there online, helping people cut the noise,
Yeah.
right? So I hope that we get to a point where people really increasingly value expertise of someone who's spends their day job curating this information, processing the information, applying it to a whole bunch of ranges of situations, for our clients, for example, so that when we put out a blog post, it's a trusted material. It's not, it's, of course we use ChatGPT. Jonathan helps us write our blog posts and does, um, contributes to it. But we would never put up a blog post without us putting in the idea in the first place of what we think is useful to our audience, and then doing a heavy edit, right? And adding strategy and adding experience and judgment in. So there's a ton of noise out there,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I have some faith in humanity that we can cut through a lot of that by just seeing, um, whether or not it's useful or not to your circumstances.
I love the phrase cut through the noise because that is definitely one of the harder things when it comes to employment law, especially if you're an army of one, so to speak,
Mm.
at a company and you're an HR person and maybe you don't have budget for a lawyer or something like that, or maybe you've never even worked or partnered with a lawyer and you know that's kind of this milestone I think in an HR person's career is like once they make the realization that they do need to have either like a solid partnership just moving forward throughout their career with someone they can pick up the phone. I'm like, hey, I'm in this
Mhm.
situation, what's your thoughts? And that was a realization for me, and it felt like it took longer for me, more just because I'm on the recruitment side more so than the HR side. But once I realized, I'm like, oh, like this is a milestone, this is a key point in every HR person's journey, is identifying that they need to have a partner on the employment law side, and it can't be someone internal, and it can't be,
Mhm.
you have to, in the same way that, if you run a business, you need to find the right accountant for your business kind of deal. But I guess in between all of that, how would you say, like, if you were giving advice to an HR person, how should they keep up to date with, the ESA and everything like that? Is the ESA website just good enough, or are there better places to go? What's your take?
Yeah. Um, I subscribe to a handful of resources that I trust, right? And so they come into my inbox still. I filter them into a newsletter folder, of course, but like they come in, and I think it's still a matter of us as human beings curating the noise as much as we can. And then beyond that, I mean, I'm always saying this to my teens as well, like always look at the domain name whenever you're looking at any information online. Don't just go with anything, because of course there's incorrect information out there, or information that's a little bit off.
Yeah.
Um, there are some really good subscription services out there that we as a law firm, we subscribe to a half dozen AI driven tools that help us with the with advising. And what I like about those is that they're already vetted within, within a certain expertise. And it's not, I mean, I love my chat GPT for sure, but I'm always, properly suspicious of the answer and
Yeah.
always like double checking it. But when you subscribe to a professional tool, then someone else has also vetted it. It's also not perfect,
Yeah.
but, there's ways of cutting through the noise by accessing the professional tools that exist out there.
Yeah.
I know in our early days of Spring Law, we've had an e-commerce store on our website for forever and would sell things like templates. I think that's where AI is really having a deep impact, is that people can just go get their own template now,
Yeah.
right? Like, and now, is the template correct? And that's where you then hire the professional, whether it's, your accountant or a lawyer or whoever, to vet the template or give you a template that they've already vetted, for example,
Hmm.
for things like contracts or, I don't know, termination letters, whatever. But for a lot of, I don't know, like a dress code policy, just go with ChatGPT a good chunk of the time, or any of the services that exist out there. But I think a lot of the services that only provide templates, we're going to see them really struggle over the next few years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
Mhm.
due for a shakeup for sure, it feels like.
Mhm.
And that's, I mean, on the TPPG side, what we do typically is anytime somebody shares a resource and there's a lot of positive reaction to it, we just brought someone on this week actually that's like dedicated to curating those conversations and
Mm,
saying, okay, this was a really good conversation, a lot of good information. We're going to store it here on our community platform so that people have access to it, for forever kind of deal. So
yeah.
it's it's a it doesn't seem like, I guess that's kind of what I was looking for, is like, what's the, like, is there one website that you go to and that's the place? And but it sounds like regardless, you almost have to, like, in the same way that there's 15 different news publications, right? And you've got different,
Mhm.
you got the left, center, and right kind of angles and perspectives. You kind of have to consume them all and then kind of make your own choice on the information coming out. There isn't, it's
Yeah.
almost like, I guess the hope in my mind is like, if the ESA was like an Apple product and then there's a big change coming out, like Apple would just like, we're launching iPhone 22 or whatever, right? Um ESA doesn't do that. They don't have someone like going on stage and saying,
Yeah.
here's all the changes that are going to happen to law. And so that question, I guess, is like, well, how does a person stay up to date on all those things?
Well,
And
here's a couple of tips then. So, all the law societies of Canada have grouped together to create CanLII, which is a free online source. CANLII. I use it many times a week.
yeah,
And so it contains all the legislation across Canada in all 14 jurisdictions and case law.
yeah,
So we now are in a world where all of that is free. And that was not free at the beginning of my career at all. It was all hidden behind costly resources. So one can always go on there, and then you can set up an alert on there, right? Of ESA updates, for example. I sign up to the Ministry of Labor's newsletter. So I highly encourage every HR person to do that as well, because then they're sending out anytime there is an update to OSHA or the ESA, or or some new amendment, or some media briefing from the Minister of Labor or whatever. You get that in your inbox. So
yeah,
that's and a good half of the time is quite useful. Again, there are services out there that can that you can pay for to get regular updates as well.
yeah,
And then subscribe to law firm newsletters,
yeah.
because that's our marketing, but it's also only effective marketing if we're also very useful.
Adding
And
value
so,
to the
and
reader.
timely and topical, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's a
Yeah.
lot to stay on top of there. Aside from AI, I guess, like, if you've always been very forward thinking in terms of where the industry is going and how to service customers and just employment law in general. What's what else is sort of capturing your attention in terms of like changes to the industry and trends that you're noticing that HR people should be aware of?
Something that I think HR is already painfully aware of is how many generations we have in the workplace right now.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just feel like every problem is so unpredictable because you've got at least 5 different generations in the workplace right now with all these different perspectives on what should be done or what reaction should happen or what responsibility someone should take to something or like all the finger pointing or communications that there's just compared to even 10 years ago or 20 years ago the variety of perspectives that are informing every messy situation in the workplace is just so huge. And I don't know what the answer is to that at
Hmm.
all, other than having a really open mind and never assume that this person who is mad at you about something because they thought that you should tell them something, but then why didn't they just ask?
Yeah.
I don't know, like like before you get mad, why don't you just ask?
Yeah.
But some of that is like just socialization and generational assumptions that are part of it but never universal. I mean, I think we can only go so far on assuming that generations will speak as a unified whole. That's not
Yeah.
accurate. But um the boomers are slowly starting to retire, so you've got people who've been in in workplaces for 30 years
Yeah.
that are now waiting for the retirement package,
Yeah.
whereas you would like to fire them. And so there's that issue, and then the young people coming in who have only ever communicated in writing on a device.
Yeah.
And like it's not hard to manage, it's just very different to manage
Yeah.
than the boomer who's finally retiring.
Almost it reminds me like the personal analogy or metaphor would be sort of Christmas dinner or holiday dinner where like everybody's at the table and it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe Grandpa said that. Or
Yes.
or like, I
Totally.
can't believe like,
Yeah.
Jimmy's on his cell phone for 45% of dinner as opposed to like actually having a conversation. It's just like we all want the same thing. We're hungry. We want to eat. We
Yeah.
want to have a
Yeah.
good time with our family, for the most part. I mean, those teenage years, right? Where it's like, no, probably not. But um yeah, no, it's so there's no answer to that.
But you know what's interesting about that example is I bet you the teenager heard just as much as what's going on as grandpa who's like tuning out and like not paying attention, right? Like and and that's I think where it comes down to assumptions where
Yeah.
um it's I'm in my early 50s, so it's hard for me to ever truly understand what it's like to be a 10-year-old
Yeah.
who has never not known what a phone is or the internet or streaming like commercials with or TV shows with a laugh track. Kid under
Yeah.
20 can't understand why we would ever have listened to that. Like there's like a whole different um experience
Yeah.
that is just foreign to me. And I just think for anyone dealing with these relationships in a workplace, and where tech will always infuse so much of what we do all day long, the assumptions that we come to the table with around how we communicate is still pretty old school. It's still about our feelings and how we think people are perceiving us. It's just there's just this infusion of all these layers of information now through technology that's just making it more complicated.
Yeah. No, yeah, so then no real that's going to continue to be a problem. I don't think AI can solve
Mhm.
it. Any kind of final thoughts just in general for the HR keen HR folks, legal curious folks listening? What's your high level take?
Well, one thing I would say is when you're working with an employment lawyer, force that lawyer to be collaborative with you, right? I think this is um the technology can really make legal services cost effective. So there should be shared data rooms. There should be ways to upload information in a quick way. We should be sharing spreadsheets so that we are, simple tech like that. Um, and if your lawyer is not tech savvy, they're probably going to cost you more money because of that. They're
Yeah.
going to take longer to do things. We can all pretend that good judgment is all you need, but that's not true. I think how you deliver things still really needs to have good efficiencies so that you can just cut to the chase and actually help solve the problem instead of all the futzing around ahead of time without technology to really help. So I think we're seeing a lot of law firms really come along, but HR tends to be further ahead than lawyers are on
Yeah.
that. So I think HR needs to nudge their lawyers to and ask questions like, what tools are you using? And, did you write this from scratch, or do you at least have a precedent or a software program that you use to help get a big head start on what is, you know, such a common document that you must be using in your practice every day.
Yeah. I've always made the analogy. I'm just going to use example because I never remember the difference between analogy and metaphor. So I always say both just as like a catch-all. So, but example is perfect. Like the example I like using, like I loved it. And so thanks for turning me on to that. But the example I think of is really just in terms of, I've lost it. Where did it go? Oh my God. What were we talking about? I'll
um,
edit this out, but oh my God,
I'm trying to give you space to remember.
it's not there.
Nudging your lawyer to use better tech or share what tech they are using so
Right.
that and share
Yeah.
that
Sorry.
they are using tech.
Yeah. Sleep is important. This will be seamless on the actual podcast.
Sure.
So the example I've always used is sort of dating around. Like I dated accountants before I started seeing one, right?
Hmm.
I think HR people should date lawyers and find the one that makes the most sense for them. And to your point, I think it is a good criteria point of like, I'm going to partner with one. I should partner with one that is showing some sense of tech forwardness, tech savviness, especially since you're saying that the entire industry is kind of a little bit behind. And it's funny you say that because HR, I feel like oftentimes we call ourselves the ones that are sort of like lagging behind in terms of tech.
Behind who though?
Just, I guess, other departments, right? If you think of like
Mm,
engineering, right? Engineering is
mm,
always going to be cutting edge and using all the AI tools before everyone. And then like marketing and like sales is kind of old school. But then like HR, have they moved around very much? That at least, that's been kind of my perspective. Like the
yeah.
whole point of the people group is kind of like to do the opposite so people can get ahead and can stay current. But
Hmm.
um and so it's kind of nice that like Spring Law and TPPG is kind of like a nice partnership because we're both two organizations that are trying to help other people stay ahead of the game as opposed to, well, let's
Hmm.
just do it this way because that's the way it's always been done, sort of deal.
If I ever hear that phrase, and everyone knows in my firm, when I hear that phrase, it like drives me completely squirrely. I just don't care whether it's been done that way before. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater every single time at all,
Yeah.
but I definitely things need to be challenged. And the problem is lawyers, we are trained to retain the status quo, to protect the status quo, right? That's what case law is. Case law is this iteration of what have all the cases before said. That's what we have to do now,
Yeah.
as opposed to how do we evolve from the past cases, and now that there's this thing called technology, like how do we how do we move things forward. And so we are trained to preserve case law, and so it's and we can't we're not the lawmakers.
Hmm.
We advocate and a judge will make the law, but we don't actually, we push and we can nudge things along, but you can't just change things overnight necessarily. Very, very, like, once a decade some case comes out that flips things around, but every day we're just reiterating what the law is, and don't shoot the messenger. So here's how we now solve the business problem in light
Yeah.
of this reality. So it's hard for lawyers to move along a bit, because we're so nervous about messing that up, and giving the wrong advice, and there's being some new case that all of a sudden came out. Like, that part is all quite stressful, but I mean, that's why we've got all the tools to help us out. But
Yeah.
um find a lawyer who is open and has a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And our training is not to have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
So for the folks that have listened so far and want to jump on a date with the folks at Spring Law, how can they best get in touch? What's the best way to do it?
So hopefully you're already in the People group, so you'd see us in there. It's a magic space in the People group where everyone shares so much. So that's really step number one, probably. And then also our website, springlaw.ca. Come join us and see what's going on there. We have a monthly webinar. If anyone hasn't been to one yet, they're a free monthly webinar. We do the third Wednesday of each month to sort of get a tasting of what the firm's all about and how we work. Or go to our YouTube channel and check that out. We post them up there all the time. We have a weekly blog post, so people can come and check out our blog posts. So there's ways to sort of check us out before anyone needs to commit. And then we have lots of forms on our website, or just email us, info@springlaw.ca. You see, a short domain name really helps with that.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
I was
then
just thinking that.
we've got this amazing intake team who will just help everybody figure out who's the right lawyer for them on the team.
Awesome. No, Lisa, this was a really, really cool conversation. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for inviting us, and for letting Spring Law partner with People Group. It's been really great.
Likewise. Awesome.
Thank you.
That's